Hi, gang, and welcome back to tomorrow's Best Practices Today. I'm Clark Newby, and today I've got Mike Barton with us. Mike is Vice President of Corporate Communications and Content Marketing at AudioEye, and we're going to talk with him about web accessibility, digital accessibility online, making sure that your assets, make sure your website, making sure that everybody can get at, understand, access the information that you're trying to share in your marketing cycles. Mike, before AudioEye, was at a head of executive marketing, content and messaging, and head of customer communications email programs at Adobe. So he knows content and digital content deeply. He's on a mission to make it more accessible. Welcome to the podcast, Mike.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm looking forward to the conversation because through your work at AudioEye, what you're and I'd love you to kind of maybe explain the mission a little bit, but you're working to make the digital world more accessible to everyone. So digital accessibility can be kind of a broad term, I think, for folks. So how at AudioEye are you guys looking at it? What's the mission? How are you trying to make us all better at it?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, it is making it so that anybody, regardless of ability, regardless of the technology that they're using to access your website or your app or your digital properties, can access it in the same way. So if I go to your site to buy a yellow shirt and a person who's blind goes to your site to buy a yellow shirt, we should both be able to search function on your site and ultimately make that purchase on your site. So digital accessibility is helping companies build their sites appropriately so that all users can visit and achieve that action of the site.
And so you start thinking about that, and of course, immediately things come to mind like if you're blind, if you can't see a website, you're not going to be following the graphics, etc. Um, there may or may not be a lot of audio content on our website. For the typical marketeer that you work with, what are straightforward examples for folks to be thinking about to start their journey in putting an accessibility filter and thinking on the content they're creating, the site they're building?
Yeah. So before answering that, I'll give a little context because I think that puts the answer in a little bit more context. So we'll use a person who's blind as an example. The way they access the internet is they use something called a screen reader, and that screen reader technology, as it sounds like, it literally reads the screen to them. So it looks at the underlying code. It'll, start the navigation, tell you the headers. It'll read the images. It'll read the links. It'll take you through the page. And uh, so that's how a person who's blind will access the site. A person who might have a mobility issue who can see the site might not have use of their hands or have very basic use. And so instead of using a mouse, they might be using a keyboard to tab through all the content. And so can somebody from your homepage tab through and get to the content that they need, continue to navigate through the site? And ultimately, again, if we're talking about a checkout flow, can they tab all their way through the content and achieve those objectives? So you have to kind of think about based on those disabilities, people are accessing it using different types of assistive technology. So going back to your question of what are some of the common issues that we see, um, it really comes down to like three buckets, and there's a whole range of issues. There's over 60 guidelines that we look at from an accessibility perspective to make sure that somebody can use a site. But as we like work with customers and we index these challenges, three top ones are always images, links, and forms. And you think about the site that you have or any site that you've been on recently, um, that makes up a ton of the site, right? Like images everywhere, right? Links to future
That's
pages where
it.
you right, exactly. Yeah, right. Those three minor things are the only
Other
thing
than
you have to
that,
worry
though, I
about.
think
So
everything was looking great.
so you're good. And so what does that mean? So images, again, this blind person is coming to look for a shirt. They know that they want a yellow shirt because they like this idea of a bright, vibrant color. And so the images on your site need to be able to be communicated through that screen reader, and the screen reader is reading the alt text. So if you're just quickly building your site and you're making very generic alt text, you might just say shirt, right? It doesn't have the color, doesn't have the, is it a V-neck? Is it a crew neck? What's the fabric that it's made out of? So a lot of the details that might otherwise be on the page, you want to include that in the images. So if you're missing alt text, like almost impossible to be able to navigate a site, right, and understand what's happening through all that imagery. Links, really the same principle. Is the text description on those links specific enough so that if I'm hovering over it and it says click here, do I know where I'm going? And more often than not, without that context, a user with a disability has to click through a lot of those just to find out where it's going, realize it's not where I wanted to go back. So you think about doing that repeatedly and over, just tons of frustration and making the experience take a lot longer than it should. And then finally, forms, which are often the lifeblood of conversion for whatever purpose your site has. If those are similarly not labeled or labeled incorrectly, a person using a screen reader isn't able to understand what they need to fill out. So, if you're at a shipping form and it doesn't say what first name and last name goes, or it's coded so it's there, but you kind of, once you put your text in, it disappears. It just makes it really hard for that end user to understand what they need to provide you so that they can accomplish the purchase or submitting the form, contact information, or whatever that is. So again, like we kind of talked about, they don't sound, I think, like the most uh, difficult scenarios, right, that we just talked about. Pretty simple, but they're everywhere. So those quickly scale to make a site maybe not unusable, but extremely difficult. And frustration and friction are two things that all of us want to reduce in a digital experience, and especially a person with a disability who already is coming into it with the challenge of using an assistive technology.
Yeah, I mean that's what makes this conversation so interesting to me. What you guys are doing is that it's not. It's very straightforward. It's a very straightforward thing that not nearly enough people think about, myself included. It's just not. It's just a blind. That's a blind spot. That's probably a poor choice of words, but it's just something that it's a filter again that we don't tend to look through the world through unless the world has put the filter on us. That we're lacking some sensory capability or mobility or something like that. So I think and then once you crack that door, it's like, well, of course, right? Well, of course. So it's interesting to me. So you mentioned you have like 60 guidelines that I'm assuming that Audio Eye, you're saying, kind of espouse. Is that the first thing that you do when working with an organization, is sort of just assess everything? Or how do you help people once they've realized this is something they need to address? And maybe it'd be interesting to hear actually how you educate folks to having that breakthrough. And then how do they get started typically with you?
Yeah, so the 60 that I was mentioning actually are not unique to AudioEye. So I'll kind of backtrack there a little. There's actually 86 what are called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and they're actually a global standard, which makes it nice in that it's not like different companies are, espousing different rules in order to create an accessible site. There's just a globally accepted set of criteria that are pass or fail, right? Also very specific so that you can say this is an accessible link or this is an inaccessible image, as an
The
example. So
definition of acceptable of good is set, so it's not
exactly.
subjective. It's not. Yeah.
Yeah, so the way that you go about identifying them on your site, fixing them, maintaining it, that is different from company to company, but the actual guidelines themselves are pretty clear. That being said, you mentioned that I worked at Adobe a number of years before coming to AudioEye. Um, and I'm speaking in my focus group of one, not with the larger Adobe ecosystem, but in all the content I created, interactive experiences, of course, tons of PDFs, lots of video, um, you know, you name the content, we were creating it. Not once in that time did I think, is this accessible to somebody who's got a disability? Is this accessible to somebody who's using a screen reader? And it was largely because I didn't know. Nobody had talked to me about it. It's not something you learn in school. It's unfortunately not something that a lot of marketers and business leaders have been thinking about. I think more and more you're hearing about it, but it just wasn't on my radar. And so, uh, like you said, once I learned about it, the light bulb clicked almost immediately. It's like, oh, yeah, like this has been something I've just unintentionally ignored over the years, and unfortunately closed that digital door to potentially hundreds of thousands over the years of people who wanted to consume my content or accomplish whatever objective they had at that time. So it really all starts with, I think, a foundation of acknowledging what you don't know, which is where I was as I, came to learn about this, which is partly why I'm on this podcast, is to share, right, that awareness with other marketers. It can be super overwhelming. It can seem really complex because, again, there's this long list of criteria. They're very detailed. They cross a number of uh, technological areas and realms. Again, that's just like understanding them, trying to then go and understand, all right, how do I shift my accessibility into my actual content creation process, my development process also can seem overwhelming. So I like to tell people, just start, right? Like, don't look at the whole world of accessibility and kind of think, I've got a ton of things going on at my organization, ton of priorities. Like, this is something that I probably should be thinking about, but I'll get to it next year. I think it can often always just be the deprioritized next thing to do. But the reality is, like, there's lots of tools out there to help you scan your site, as an example. I think that's the first step because one of the misperceptions we come across a lot with people is, oh, we have a really good team. They're doing alt text, they're doing that type of stuff, and so like we probably are pretty accessible. And most companies, when they do that first scan, are shocked to see that they've got hundreds of issues per page, not per site, hundreds of issues per page. And again, it's because if you have an image that you use repeatedly and that one image is wrong, then right, it cascades exactly across your site. So really understanding where your site is today is the first step. And then I think just learning the best practices of creating accessible content. So many companies who are thinking about it are treating it as like a checkbox, a final step. Have we created an accessible, web page here? And just with anything that if you're looking at it the second it's about to go out the door, it's inaccessible. You pass the point unless you kind of go back and slow things down. So we really do also work with companies to shift their thinking left in terms of accessibility, and from the beginning, think about building accessible experiences, accessible content, accessible digital products.
I'm sure there's some stuff you got when there's 85 industry accepted standards for something, it starts to get a whiff of compliance of, you know, you're going to have to do. You have a compelling event that is being put upon you in some cases, I would imagine.
And a lot of those marketers, a lot of those business leaders who right now are thinking about accessibility, didn't come across it because they heard me talking on a podcast. They are thinking about it because they've been sued. A user tried to use their site, couldn't, and said, "Hey, the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was, finalized 35 years ago and made it so that me as a person with a disability should have equal access to businesses and spaces like this. That applies to the digital world. And so, if a person with a disability can't actually accomplish that goal that they want to on your site, they can sue you. California has laws as well that if you have a customer in the state of California, your site needs to be accessible. So even if you are based in a different location, just having customers with disabilities who are trying to use your site, it takes effect. The European Union just recently launched the European Accessibility Act, which has very similar fines and can have impacts to business. So there's that aspect of it that I think more and more people are starting to see, oh, we need to do this from like a risk management perspective to start. But then there's a smaller group, which I hope again will get larger and larger over time, that actually sees that yes, compliance is important. Yes, it's important to just do it because it's the right thing to do so that people can access your site. But there's a lot of business benefits that come from creating accessible experiences, from implementing accessible best practices. So SEO has a tremendous lift when you're, uh, you know, building accessibly because those links, those images that have that descriptive text behind it, that all gets crawled. Brand reputation, right? As you start to um, make it known that you're an accessible company, that's something that you can, begin to differentiate from competitors who maybe the products and the services. Well, we're out here making good choices in the world. And then finally, from like a customer acquisition and retention, 1 in 4 people in the US have a disability of some sort. And so if you're not building accessible experiences, those digital doors are being closed to a lot of those potential customers. So you bring them in, customers who are already trying to work and find you. And what we found in talking with people with disabilities is when they find a site that's easy to use, right? No different from any of us. I find a site that's easy to use, I'm back at it, right? I become loyal because they make it easy for me to do business with them. And so people with disabilities, when they find sites that are accessible, they're going to be very loyal, very repeat customers, and they tell their friends about it. Other people with disabilities, they tell their family and friends about it who don't have disabilities but want to support businesses who support their friends and family, right, and make their lives easier. At the end of the day, uh, the digital world makes all of our lives easier. I don't have to go to the bank anymore. I don't have to go get a newspaper. I don't have to go do, all these things. And so, uh,
We
people
can
with
sit
disabilities,
inside and do podcasts all
yes, yes,
day.
exactly, exactly.
But
I
it's true.
haven't had
All
to
of our
leave the
lives
house.
are so much more digital now, right? I mean, that you talk about the readers and the tools and the technology that folks with disabilities can use because it's more difficult for them to get out, get in a vehicle, get into town, get into a store, rifle through hangers or shelves or whatever, right? They can do this all digitally. But so say we all. We're all shopping. We're living our lives online digitally. So that's a great point. There's sort of like there's the disabled community. There's those kind of the allies of the disabled community. But everyone is living in this more digital realm now. So you're turning the gain up for all of your business. That makes a lot of
Yes.
sense.
Yeah, and the improvements that you make by following accessibility best practices don't just make that experience less friction and easier for a person with a disability. Everyone else often who's using it does as well. So, an example would be if you're going through your site and thinking, all right, we could have people with cognitive disabilities who are trying to access our content. So, is it as simple as possible? Are we as clear and as straightforward as possible? Are we using too many acronyms that, again, confuse it? If you message your site to focus on simplicity, to focus on really getting the core messages across, that's not just helping that person with a cognitive disability. Everyone else who comes in who's rushed, who's just trying to quickly get the information right, that benefits the entire user base. So that's something I think people are surprised and happy to see as well as that focus on accessibility actually, the rising tide lifts all boats principle. They see that those best practices really have an impact across their entire user base.
Yeah, that you've done a great job for us, kind of giving us the buckets of ways to think about this and ideas of how to get started. Uh, our our retail audience are practitioners and leaders, right? So it would also be great to hear maybe a success story or two of where you see a very typical sort of on the ground, because we've talked about, well, get the lay of the land and remember alt text and be specific, be simple. Many of these things are good advice for marketing messaging, period, right? Be
Right.
clear, be concise. Um, but what are a couple of typical wins that you see for organizations in the first, in the opening months of really getting serious about addressing accessibility?
Yeah, I mean, let's go back to those three that we talked about at the top of the show: images, links, and forms. So really with images, like one of the simplest way uh, to get some quick wins is by checking your alt text on your homepage and your key user journey and flows. So if you're an e-commerce site, that homepage, your product pages, and the checkout form, right? And again, imagining that a screen reader is going to be reading that alt text. So the key really with your images is make them as descriptive and short as possible. So that yellow t-shirt example I gave earlier, right? Instead of just saying t-shirt, you want to give the description that helps somebody who's not visually seeing that shirt have enough of an understanding to say, okay, that's something, right, that I would want to wear. So descriptive and short. And then another, important piece that is actually missed a lot is that we also have a number of images that are just kind of decorative, right? They are there for the visual
Uh,
aesthetic and
the
design, but they're
brand
actually,
aesthetic, yeah.
yeah,
It's
but
the
they're not.
design language, Mike. Come on.
Yes, exactly. And hey, it's great. It does look good, but if you are a blind person who's using a screen reader, that brand aesthetic actually gets in your way. So you actually want to mark the unimportant images as decorative, and then the screen reader will skip over those and really only give the key image content to that screen reader. And so that's another uh, thing that's actually super helpful because somebody might say, oh, I need to go in and be very descriptive on all these, but there could be half of the images on the page that actually aren't critical. And so by skipping over those, you're actually saving that person using a screen reader from really trying to consume content
Yeah,
that
having to
they don't need
process
to.
something that doesn't matter. That's a great insight.
Yeah, so that's really helpful with images. And again, links, kind of mentioned this when we were talking about it, but it's really, again, just that level of specificity so that in looking at that link and reading the description behind it on a screen reader, click here, learn more, super unhelpful. Like if you're visually looking at it, you can generally get the context of where it's going. But again, a person using a screen reader doesn't have that visual context. So instead of saying learn more, you would just say something simply like download our accessibility checklist. And again, that specificity, not only helpful for a screen reader, but also for SEO and the crawling that's happening in the background there. So finally, forms. And again, this is where the business happens, and that's where people are signing up for something, they're buying something, they're contacting you. So if your forms are inaccessible, I think you can safely say you're losing customers. So the key is I'd say pretty simple, that every form field needs a label. So don't rely on that, again, that placeholder text that can disappear when you start typing. Sometimes when there's errors on the form, right, with like a date or the format of a name, sometimes you'll just get an error message. But again, for a screen reader, they don't know what was wrong or what they need to do correctly. So like an error message that might pop up needs to not just say error or invalid, try again, but it needs to say like, please enter your email in the format name at example.com. And then finally, of course, can that form be used simply by tabbing through with a keyboard, or does somebody actually have to have a mouse? Because if they have to have a mouse, then somebody with a mobility is not going to be able to easily do that. So those are a few, pretty specific best practices that, again, if you are able to implement those as you're building your pages, as you're building your site, that's going to help so much of your experience and so much of your accessibility, and especially in the forms and the checkout processes, where the money literally meets the road, so to speak. That's where you're having big impact.
Well, and we're constantly, right, we're constantly taking the landing pages and the forms, into the shop to tune them up and A/B test and all this stuff. So, for our listeners, right, here's some, while you're in there, while you've got the body cavity open, like get in there and you can address some of this stuff right right along with everything else. That's really straightforward. Some really straightforward examples. Thanks, Mike. What does make me think about a couple of things. So, 'cause one thing we talked about was the clarity, the simplicity of messaging, etc., which is, I think always good practice for marketing messaging, clear, concise positioning, not being afraid to deep position yourself from folks that you're not interested in working with. So, like, just go ahead and be clear. Um, but in the practice of building websites, in using websites to collect leads, frankly, which can be considered in this day and age, maybe not the most modern take, but it really is. These forums really are how you're finding, you're getting folks to step up with you, to interact with you from the website. But these links and stuff, sometimes we make them a little bit vague, right? We make them we tease a little bit. It's like, learn more. Like, I don't tell, if you tell them everything, they don't have any more to learn, right? So we use these tripwires in a site to kind of bring folks through the conversation with us. Uh, that's just fact of life. How do you balance that with the mission that we're talking about, to make sure people, it's accessible and things are clear and people can know what they're interacting with?
Yeah, I think part of the answer to that is also recognizing that the modern buyer is evolving dramatically. And those types of, I think you call them tripwires, um, that might have worked or might have kind of helped kind of push leads or push business in the years of the past. I feel like that's changing actually quite a bit, and users, we've heard it before too. Like, it's not about B2B or B2C, it's P2P, where people talking to people, and the clear differences that used to exist between these two types of people have changed, and a lot of how a consumer tries to buy in their personal life has bled over to how they now want to buy in their business life. And so I think that the more and more, especially going into the future, the modern buyer wants that authentic experience. They want the transparency, which again, super buzzwords. I acknowledge that I'm throwing out words that have been thrown around. There's countless books on them, but that is truly the buyer of the futures. They want the information at their fingertips. They want to um, feel like the company that they're interacting with and learning from is not trying to manipulate them. It is not trying to trick them. So if a tactic I'd say that is being used on your site that you're using, or that you as a user experience feels a little bit like trickery, it's definitely not accessible, and it's probably only a short-term play, meaning that I think companies who are looking for loyalty, who are looking for customers who are the right fit, and are looking for customers that have a need that their product or service has a strong solution for. Um, those are the experiences I want to create. I want to bring those two people together, the person who needs something and the company that has a strong solution for them. And so I think, again, as you're implementing accessibility best practices, that leads to, again, like you just said, to the clarity. It leads to better content and messaging. It leads to better UX, better findability, and at the end of the day, ultimately, you create those trustworthy and authentic experiences. And it's a long-term play, but I think that those are the businesses who will see growth, who will see better loyalty, less churn with their customers also.
That just has that vibe, I think, right? That feel of being accessible, of being straightforward and transparent. You're gonna improve. So it starts as a kind of a technical sort of like, holy cow, like before the CFO or legal gets over here, I better make sure I've looked at this. To really, I think, done the right way, and certainly what you're preaching is, you know, if you're making baking into your philosophy, you're going to be a better marketing machine. You're going to be more successful overall. That's great.
Yeah, well said. Very well said. And you mentioned testing and personalization a little bit earlier. Like, there's companies who, as they should, are spending tens of thousands, if not millions of dollars, depending on the company size, on testing and personalization and optimizing, right, these experiences for users. And they're, I think, happy to hear and realize often that accessibility is a much smaller investment that you can make. And again, you're immediately opening the door to a group who is already trying to engage with you and will then be able to. So it's a lever that has tremendous impact with a very minimal investment compared to some of these other things that we're so focused on.
Oh gosh, thanks for joining us for this conversation, Mike. Well, I kind of said jokingly, "Oh well, we're all living digitally now, and we don't." You said, "Oh, we don't have to go to the store, we don't have to get a newspaper, so we sit in these screens." But so we're lucky with the lead tail community to have folks like you that can come in and open our eyes to these things and share it. But it is a community, and welcome to it. And so we always like to connect on a few levels, maybe that aren't in the office or in the screen. So when you're not in a box on my screen, educating and sharing with us, you know, what do you like to do? Where do you yeah, where are you traveling these days? If you get the chance to travel, or you know, what are you doing out in the real world?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of travel, and noticed the maps back there. I don't know if those colors are places you've traveled or want to travel. We have a similar map in another room, but yeah, I love to travel with my family. We went to Switzerland recently and have been there a few times, and just love going to Switzerland. The scenery is just amazing. You can get a bratwurst on every corner, which, I'm down for that. But yeah, love going out there. And when I'm just local, I'll go running and biking to kind of get out, and that gets my creative juices flowing. I found if I need a little bit of inspiration for a content piece or something in the messaging just isn't quite landing right, I have to escape the environment that I'm in most of the day and kind of get outside, clear my head, and those endorphins usually bring in a random idea that helps me. So
Mike Barton, this has been such an enjoyable conversation and such an eye-opening conversation. Not just again to kind of learn about something like, come on, guys, you know, think about accessibility, but this philosophical ribbon that goes through all of it. As if you're doing a great job at accessibility, you're bringing your whole game up. And so if you're doing a great job at the marketing game, it's not a separate other task really to do a good job at this, right? It's a little bit more technology, but you know, if you build it into the process, one plus one can equal a lot more than three, I think.
mhm, yeah,
And it's just the right thing to do, like you say. Thank you
Ellie.
so much, Mike, for taking the time. Uh, Super enjoyable, super useful conversation. Thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.